Joanne Naughton. I'm a member of an organization called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP. I'm retired from the NYPD. I retired as a lieutenant. I was a detective and I worked undercover in narcotics. I went out on the streets of Manhattan and the Bronx and I bought drugs. In the war on drugs. I was a good soldier in the war on drugs. Many, many years later, I've come to realize that the war on drugs, which is still going on, isn't working. I'm an attorney. I represented so many young people charged with possessing drugs, illegal drugs, selling them, and they were facing years and years in prison, all for nonviolent conduct. I've come to realize that the war on drugs is a mistake. It hurts people more than drugs do. And I want to see drugs legalized, regulated, and taxed. I'm not talking about a free-for-all, capitalism gone wild as far as drugs are concerned. They need to be regulated. But if people want to use drugs, that should not be a criminal justice issue. That's a health issue if the drugs are causing a problem. People should be free to use marijuana, use cocaine, use any drugs. And most people who use any of these drugs do not become addicted. Furthermore, after over 90 years of drugs being illegal, over 40 years of the war on drugs, drugs are more available, drugs are purer, drugs are cheaper. So obviously, we're not winning the war on drugs. And obviously, the criminal justice approach to a health problem is not working.
As an undercover cop, when you were out there making drug deals and buying drugs for the police department, what kind of mindset did you have when you're doing that?
When I was out on the streets buying drugs from dealers, and let me just say here that most dealers were small-time drug users who were selling to support their habits, I thought I was doing the right thing. Just like most people thought it was the right thing to do. I thought that if we arrested enough people that we'd get rid of drugs in America, get rid of illegal drugs in America. We'd have a drug-free society. Well, that's foolish. It's crazy, magical thinking. You cannot do that. Human beings like to relax, and human beings have always used substances to help them relax. There's nothing wrong with that. I thought I was doing the right thing.
Now, if you could go back to what you know now and do it over, is there something that you would do differently in that position as an undercover officer?
You know, you have to remember, if I could go back and do things over again, I'm not so sure I would do things very differently. I was a person who was employed. I needed a job, just like an awful lot of other people do. I needed to keep on working. I needed to do that job. I didn't have to be an undercover. If I thought back then that it wasn't the right thing to do, well, I could have put on a uniform and gone on patrol. I would, if I could, educate people back then. But you know, you're talking to somebody. Cops don't set policy. And I didn't set policy or create policy back then. The mayor, the police commissioner, the people of the city, they're the ones who set policy. So it's not as if I could go back then and have a revolution. No, I was a person without power. So I needed a job, I had a job, and I did it the way the public wanted me to do that job. There's
certain people who live in the inner cities with certain demographics that they grow up believing that selling drugs is their only outlet, their only way to survive. And that's a fallacy. That's a fallacy. Do you think that, what else could they do? Do you have any sort of inspirational words to tell someone like that to look for another outlet, try to find another more positive way to survive and make money?
It's hard for me to talk to somebody who lives in the inner city and give them inspiration, because I haven't walked in their shoes. I am a believer in education. I went to law school as an adult. Going to law school, getting a law degree changed my life in a positive way. I have opportunities that other people didn't have. As a young woman out of high school, I still had opportunities that a lot of people of color didn't have and don't have. So we've got to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity. That's a lovely phrase, and we've got to keep working on it.
Well, this is a two-part question. Why do you think people use drugs? And if we can't fight the drugs themselves, because drugs are always going to be available, is there any way we can change the conventional wisdom or how people feel or think about themselves so they don't have to turn to drugs as an outlet?
Why people use drugs and why people become addicted to drugs it depends on many, many things. There are many causes for people using drugs and many causes for people become addicted to drugs. And people who use drugs don't automatically become addicted. A guy called Carl Hart wrote a wonderful book about drugs and about addictions. He's a neuroscientist who grew up in Miami. He's somebody who knows personally about the use of drugs. People self-medicate for lots of various reasons. There are either psychological reasons or physiological reasons, emotional reasons, reasons having to do with their upbringing. There are many, many reasons that people use drugs in a destructive way. And each person's story will probably be different. It's a mental health issue in many cases. If somebody is addicted to a substance, any substance or any activity, gambling, alcohol, it's a health issue. And that's how we should look at it. And let the professionals take a look. And the medical professionals, they can hurt, well, the criminal justice system will hurt people. Medical professionals can help people, and I'd rather see people try put their fate in the hands of medical professionals rather than the criminal justice system.
We're advocating for a change in the drug policy, which is a failure on its own terms. We are not pro-drug by any means, but we think a rational public health model, drug policy will be more effective at keeping people from using drugs, abusing drugs, being damaged by drugs, and education is much more effective in substance abuse reduction than punishment and incarceration.
But we are slowly winning the war on drugs. I mean, 20 years ago, you know, after the Reagan destruction, I mean, you know, to talk about weed, I mean, people were like, what are you on? Your brain on drugs, you know what I mean? Now, I mean, I used to feel like a zero back in the 90s when I talked about legalizing marijuana. Now I'm a hero, you know? Attitudes have changed. More than 50% of the American population believe marijuana should be legal just for use, and like 70 or 80% believe it should be legal for medical use. There are 18 states and the District of Columbia now that have legalized marijuana for medicinal use. The war on drugs is being won by our side.